So welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Brinen. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Drexel's College of Medicine. I was fortunate enough after I got out of grad school to go and work with Dr. Beck at the University of Pennsylvania at his center, where I was lucky to work with him as he was developing this with the rest of his team. I was one of the last clinicians added onto the clinical trial, I was the last clinician, I believe, added onto the clinical trial. And then afterwards, as we started to disseminate this, I had this wonderful task and opportunity to take what we did in the clinical trial to turn it into this protocol. And so this has just been my life's work, and at Drexel I continue to direct the center disseminating this. I'm really excited to be able to join you guys today. So today's topic is recovery-oriented cognitive therapy for psychosis. This is going to be a nice broad overview giving some of the conceptual pieces of how we took Beck's cognitive therapy and applied it to a group of individuals who were least likely to engage in treatment. So the first question that often comes up is, what is recovery-oriented cognitive therapy? And the best way to think about recovery-oriented cognitive therapy is that it's a fusion of cognitive therapy and the recovery movement, right? So the recovery movement brings about these beautiful and wonderful sort of cultural, there's a spirit to it when we're thinking about things like hope and empowerment and purpose. These are and connection. These are wonderful ideas, but many of the individuals who I've trained over these, my 10 years of training people ask, that's great, but how do you make hope happen? And so one of the things that cognitive therapy provides us is a really wonderful that nuts and bolts know-how of how to make these things happen. And so what recovery-oriented cognitive therapy is this fusion of cognitive therapy with the spirit of the recovery movement. It really does focus on sort of where are people going to be going in their lives versus focusing on sort of problem hunting as much. So there is a slight shift in focus in the way that we do it. It was interesting because probably 10 years ago, Dr. Aaron Beck, was asked to speak to SAMHSA about how are cognitive therapy and the recovery movement and the recovery movement alike. And Dr. Beck is a really wonderful mentor to have because he always asks us to think about the questions that he's asked to think about. And we get to partner in thinking these things through. So he sends this email out to all of us as postdocs and staff members and things like that. And he asks that of us. And so I happen to have been a particularly anxious postdoc. I wasn't quite sure that I belonged there. So that always made me really nervous that somebody was going to figure it out. So my compensatory strategy was I would show up an hour or 2 hours before my shift. And I sat and I read through all of the original texts again that Beck had written. And so when he sends this question out, I'm reading Cognitive Therapy of the Emotional Disorders. And so my response back is, cognitive therapy is not like the recovery movement. Cognitive therapy has always been the recovery movement. And so over the time that I'm reading the book, I'm sending him the headings of every one of his chapters. But if you go to page 9, second paragraph down of Cognitive Therapy of the Emotional Disorders, Beck describes how the two prominent theoretical orientations of the day, behaviorism and psychoanalysis, would not help somebody truly recover. And he writes how the collaborative nature of cognitive therapy is the only way that somebody would recover. The whole paragraph is a description of the recovery movement in 1976. So one of the final sentences of the paragraph is that Beck says that cognitive therapy is helping the patient draw on his own problem-solving apparatus. So Beck in 1976 always understands that the solution is within the individual all along. Therapy or treatment is a meeting of two experts. There's experts in their own life, the individuals that we serve, and then there's experts in And we're only experts in how many people have recovered. So there's a beautiful coming together of two experts. And that's really the core spirit of cognitive therapy, and it really always has been. What recovery-oriented cognitive therapy did was we basically created an extension of CBT for psychosis to individuals least likely to engage in treatment. Those individuals are typically thought of as the individuals with negative symptoms, right? Those problems with motivation and the problems with connecting with other people. So whereas traditional CBT for psychosis oftentimes would focus in on hallucinations and delusions, recovery-oriented cognitive therapy, or CTR as I'm going to call it, really privileges the negative symptoms, those problems with motivation and the problems with connection. We have a really good reason for that. One of the reasons is that the negative symptoms are much more this study found that the negative symptoms are much more prevalent than people believe that they are. And also they're more associated with poor functioning and poor quality of life. Also, negative symptoms are more predictive of going back to the hospital than hallucinations and delusions and neurocognitive deficits, right? And neurocognitive functioning, right? So that's like attention and memory and all that goodness. So if, as providers, we're in the stay out of the hospital, have a better quality of life and function better gig, that's like what we would love as a good, that's an outcome that we're interested in. The money is in the negative symptoms. So if you really think about it, though, it kind of makes sense. Think about just the logic that we've always said to our individuals, right? When we say, you know, when we talk to the individuals that we serve about the idea of what happens when you isolate, right? And when we talk to the individuals we serve about what happens when you don't do things, when you're bored, when you're inactive, right? Those are the times that we talk about, you know, that when you're isolated and you're alone, you're more likely to have increased distressing voices, worry about the persecution you believe is happening to you. You might have increased stress at those times. And you actually, as you do less and you engage in the world around you, you have a reduction of new data. You're not taking in anything. So if anybody out there has treated anxiety disorders, avoidance actually helps you feel better in the short run, but in the long run, it reduces new data for you. And so that's what happens with the negative symptoms. It's an actual symptom that is propelling that lack of new data and isolation. So just by logic, it makes sense that the negative symptoms are going to make all of the other symptoms much worse. Also, if we think about it, the negative symptoms, if you got rid of all the rest of the symptoms, they're more likely to sort of blossom again when somebody's not engaged in things and is isolating away from other people. So if we think about it as a problem with motivation and a problem with connection, it makes a lot of sense why these symptoms are really crucial. Also, these are the symptoms that are not helped by medication, by antipsychotic medication. And in fact, usually when I ask a room full of psychiatrists this, what's the effect on these symptoms? The answer is it makes them worse. So these symptoms, while they've been observed for over 250 years, I think some of the original descriptions were that the wellspring of motivation has run dry. Well, these symptoms have been around for years before antipsychotic medication. The medicines make them worse and they don't help them. So typically, there was an idea that the negative symptoms were just these holes in the head, right? That these individuals really couldn't be helped because it was just something was wrong with their brain. Their brain had was sort of disconnected. So Beck, in his sort of classic way, didn't really buy that idea. And so what he did when people said, hey, the people we could use help with are these individuals who just sit around the edge of all of our day treatment programs and don't do anything, they started doing what Beck has done for every problem he's ever approached. He started asking people questions. He started interviewing the individuals with these problems and asking them. And what he started to find was there was a series of predictable beliefs that he could identify. For the problems with motivation, there were two types of beliefs that they found. The first one is these defeatist performance beliefs. These beliefs that, sort of, I've failed. Why try? It's not going to work out anyway. Then there's the conservation of energy. I can't do it until I get the energy. And those actually explain the relationship between problems with attention and memory, neurocognition, and the negative symptoms. Then there's asociality, right? That sort of not wanting to connect with other people. And what Beck found was that there were these asocial beliefs or social disinterest beliefs that were underlying, that actually predicted social interaction at follow-up. And so he found that these beliefs were driving it. And it wasn't that these people were introverts. It's that he found that they had sort of soured to the idea of socializing. So for all of you fine people on this phone right now, having friends is a great idea and you'll definitely be able to do it. But for me, right, it's just not meant for me. I don't have that ability. And so they found that these asocial beliefs predicted performance. And in fact, Eric Granholm, who's out of San Diego, did a study recently where he found the asocial beliefs, they actually impacted. So if you were good at socializing, but you didn't have interest in socializing, you actually did worse socially. So it actually impacted the belief. Also, other negative symptoms like anhedonia. Individuals with schizophrenia don't experience anhedonia. They just don't anticipate that they're going to enjoy things, so they don't engage in them. And so when they don't engage in them, they conclude that they weren't going to be enjoyable to begin with. And alosia is a symptom that actually increases over the course of time of somebody's illness. And so they really start to develop this expectation that people don't want to have to hear what I have to say anyway, so I might as well be quiet. And so they stop speaking. So the downside is that many of these individuals have these maladaptive beliefs, these beliefs that are really toxic and ultimately create an initial barrier even into therapy. But the good news is they're beliefs. And so beliefs are sort of the cognitive therapists, it's our jam. So beliefs we're good with. And so one of the things that we need to start thinking about as we get into developing a treatment, because that was the next step that Beck took, is really understanding that therapy is about having a motivation to engage in a different type of behavior and connecting with another person. These negative symptoms, if you recall, I described them as a problem with motivation and a problem with connection. And so those are, these very symptoms are going to block people from potentially engaging in the therapy that might be helpful. So we're going to have to sort of figure that out as a team. So the first belief that we're going to look at, this conservation of energy. I can't do it till I get the energy. I almost wish I had created a poll to see how many people have heard their individuals say, doc, I can't do it until I get the energy. And so as a result, they're inactive. And when you don't do stuff, your energy goes down. Anybody who currently is at home for the isolation, if you laid around all morning and looked at YouTube, all of a sudden your energy goes down. Even though you may have rested up all morning, by noon, I have less energy. And so we know that activity precedes energy coming in. The next set of beliefs is the defeatist performance beliefs. This idea of why try, it won't work out anyway. A little mistake is as bad as a complete catastrophe. I'm broken. The interesting part about these beliefs is that the idea of avolition, that lack of motivation to engage in things, we always had this idea that they just didn't engage in things. But what Eric Granholm out of San Diego found was that when individuals had more pronounced defeatist beliefs, those individuals, when given a task where you wanted to apply yourself, those individuals were engaging in the task just as much as normal, individuals who didn't have the beliefs, normals, were doing. But what Granholm finds is that when people who are in the normal category continue to exert effort, right, as measured by pupillary response, the individuals with the defeatist beliefs stop early. So a translation of this idea is where many people continue to try even when it starts to get hard, and then we ultimately are successful or we're not successful. The individuals we serve they're always putting out a little bit of effort, but then they're not pushing through all the way to get to the complete success. So they're in this constant state of almost like if it were poker, it's like they ante up, but they never really bet. So they're constantly losing and reinforcing this idea of why try, it won't work out anyway. Or a little mistake is as bad as a complete catastrophe. And then there's the social disinterest beliefs. Time with other people isn't worth the effort. The response, though, is that people start to avoid socializing. And, you know, if you stay at home, you go, see, I didn't have any fun. So socializing with people wasn't going to be worth it. So after Beck identifies this series of beliefs, he engages in a clinical trial to test whether a therapy is going to work. And what he did was he compared cognitive therapy to cognitive therapy plus standard treatment to standard treatment. And, you know, it was really good standard treatment. I feel like we're doing really good work here in Philly. And so it was really good standard treatment. And what he found is at the end of treatment, that individuals were functioning better. So they were doing more in their life, which was really the outcome we were looking for, is are they going to do more in their life? Reduced avolition and apathy, which is sort of weird because avolition and apathy is a reduction in motivation. So if you reduce a reduction, first, you get a very angry English teacher. But second, if you reduce a reduction, you actually increase the motivation. You see that the motivation is increased. So we had a reduction in avolition and apathy. But the weird thing that we found is that there was a reduction in the positive symptoms, the hallucinations and delusions. But remember, this was a study of the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. But we found that by hitting the negative symptoms, that we actually had an impact on the hallucinations and delusions, the positive symptoms. They ended up following up on the trial too to see, and they found that 6 months after treatment was removed, they continued to have better functioning, continued to have a reduction in negative symptoms, and continued to have a reduction in the hallucinations and delusions. They also found, they defined length of illness as the cutoff was 10 years for a shorter length of illness or a longer length of illness. But they found that the individuals with a shorter length of illness, they're the blue line, and they respond at about the 6-month mark. And then they found that individuals with a longer length of illness, more than 10 years, they responded, but they didn't respond until the follow-up period. And so one of the things that we really drew from this is the idea that really we have no idea who will recover and who won't, but length of illness isn't going to be a predictor. And so I think of it as almost like the Dory from Finding Nemo. You know, just keep swimming, you know, just keep doing it, adjusting it like good cognitive therapists do, take in data, adjust what we're doing along the way. This is research out of England, out of the UK, because they would never let us do it here, where they compared cognitive therapy to antipsychotic medicine to a combination. I call it look ma, no meds. And they found that individuals did just as well, cognitive behavioral therapy, no meds. I think they performed equally. Not surprisingly, when you didn't have medicine, you had fewer side effects. And so it's really interesting work that Toni Morrison is doing out of the UK. So this leads us, you know, our study led us to this idea about a different, possibly a different cycle of recovery that we can understand. That as we help individuals increase their motivation, they're going to start doing a little bit more in their life. But as we start doing a little bit more in our life, we have a reduction in the hallucinations and delusions. But if you're not hearing all that kind of like bad stuff in your mind, it actually is pretty motivating. You get like a little bit more motivated. which has you do a little bit more, which gives you a little bit less time for that stuff in your mind. And it becomes this righteous cycle of recovery. And so what we're going to be talking about is an approach to treatment where we're not going to be going after the problems at first, but figuring out how do we get people engaged in their life first. So we sort of pull down the heat on some of these symptoms before we go after them. So it leads us to this idea of these two types of modes. Beck is really keen on this idea of understanding the individuals as these different types of modes. And I think, many people who work with this population have described this to me. If you've ever had that time where, you're doing your intake paperwork and you're asking all these questions and the individual is just giving you one-word answers, yup, yup, nope, yup, or maybe just like staring at you. And then after a while, we're all friends now, so we can say this, you might get frustrated and go, did you see the Lakers game? And all of a sudden this guy who won't give you 2 words just explodes into energy. And he gives you this massive dissertation about what the Lakers need to do. And that he feels like you spent too much money in the arena. So they sort of feel, like entitled, but really where they're going to go this year. And this individual just sort of blooms like you're sitting in the park chatting with a friend about the Lakers. And so we really started with that as a starting point, because I would go into hospitals and I would talk with individuals, I would talk with, staff, and some of them would say, oh, that guy? Yeah, he won't talk to you about anything. I mean, unless you talk to him about the Lakers, then he'll talk your ear off. And I don't mean to be like the worst cognitive therapist ever, like the most incorrigible. But if you say that he won't talk to you about anything, and he talks to you about the Lakers, he will talk to you about something. He just doesn't want to talk about what you want to talk about. And so it really gave us this clue that there are activities and things that we can do with the individuals that we serve that will draw out this individual, and draw this individual out in a way where they're quite adaptive, right? We can have conversations with the individual. We can figure things out with the individual. And what we've ultimately started to call this adaptive mode. Just as equally, we observed that we as practitioners, we as providers, can just as easily elicit a patient mode, right? Those times where the symptoms are really prominent. When do they usually happen? When we're asking about medicine, we're telling them that they need to go to group. When we talk to them about showering, when we ask them all of these questions, when we fill out our sheets, those are the times where you see this patient type behavior emerge forward. And so in that case, some of the pathology we can start looking at is being sort of developed by the provider or by the environment that the person's coming from. So if that's the case, what if we started to design a whole treatment, a whole version of cognitive therapy where we capitalize on the times when the individual is in the adaptive mode, and we reduce the time when the individual is likely to end up in the patient mode? What if we started doing it in that order? And that's what we're going to be looking at in the basic protocol of CTR. So by this point, I bet people would like to hear sort of what the therapy looks like, because you didn't log in just to hear a lot of research. The good news is, if you really don't like research, we're done. The bad news is, if you really like research, we're done. So, so the way that the therapy works is like this. We start with this idea, those ways that we pull somebody into this adaptive mode. And what we call it is activation, because if you think about these different modes, it's really activating a network of schema, right? Or a network of beliefs. And by extension, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are all activated. There are times where we activate ones around capability and about likability and connection, or we can just as easily pull in individuals to the idea that they're broken, or that they're alone, or they're likely to be rejected. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start engaging and activating the individual in the ways that brings out their best self. And even in this way where activating an incompatible set of beliefs. And so those might be the times that you can think about watching a YouTube clip, going for a walk, sharing a cup of tea. Think about the times. I mean, especially the people who are on this call are the people who have probably been at this gig for a really long time. Think about the things that you just do with your individuals where all of a sudden it just feels like sitting across from another individual. And so we're going to start by doing that. Start with those types of conversations. Once you find that the individual is really sort of engaged and in there, that's when we're going to start reaching in for their aspirations. What are the things that they want to be doing? What are the things that they want to get in their life, right? And the aspirations are going to be the core. They're going to be this driving piece. And interestingly enough, a lot of times we think in this for individuals with serious mental illness is that a lot of what people think about is set these small accomplishable goals. And the small goals can be really demoralizing. How many people out there on this call, really thought when they were 7 years old, when I'm 44, I hope I can shower 3 times a week. If that didn't motivate you when you were 7 years old, I hope I can take my medicine every day. If that didn't motivate you then, why would it motivate the individuals that we serve? And further, why would it motivate the individuals that we serve who are having trouble with motivation? This is a group of people where we need to basically provide like the biggest jolt of motivation. So we're going to be looking at things that might be a little bit further. These are not going to be your specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-limited goals. These are going to be those big picture things. My mom's getting sick and I want to take care of her because she's older and she's always loved me. My son's 11 now and he's getting bigger and I want to teach him to cook the way that my dad taught me to cook. These are the things that we want to go for. Sure, there may be a little bit of pain with it, but those are going to be the things that drive us. Those are the things that get us up every single day. Once we have the aspiration, we're actually going to make it more vivid. We're not going to get to breaking it down yet. We want to talk about it. Beck once said to me, he goes, Aaron, you want to make sure that you know the breed of dog that the person wants in their apartment. That's how vivid we want the individual to see it. We should be able to bite into it. I call it ripening up the goal. Just like a really good juicy piece of fruit will just sort of dribble down your face, the goal should be that ripe, that vivid that you could step into it right now, because that's where the motivation comes from. Think about yourselves. Has anybody here ever thought about whether it's getting a new apartment or going on a trip? Once you have that vividly in your mind, how many people here are more motivated to do like all the annoying stuff that you have to do? So that way, when it's time to go on your trip, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to return any phone calls when you're on the road, right? Those are the things that motivate us. They're going to motivate the individuals that we serve. Once the aspiration is really ripe, and we probably want a couple of them, that's when we'll start breaking it down to the things we could be doing right here, right now to move toward these aspirations, right? And those will be your specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time limited. Those objectives, those things that we could do every day to move forward. So I might want to engage in more masterful and pleasurable activities to make sure that I'm feeling better, right? I might get up every day and walk a little bit. I might start, investigating recipes so that I could teach my son to cook. All of these things are the specific things that we're going to do each day. Once we start looking at what are we going to do each day and start scheduling some of that in, right? That's when we're going to start seeing some of the obstacles are probably going to pop up. I like thinking of them more as obstacles because obstacles you only have to address if they're getting in the way. So you can hear voices. Lots of people hear voices, but they're only a problem if they're getting in the way of you going and teaching your son how to cook, right? You can believe that the FBI is after you, but it's only a problem if you can't go and take care of your mom or your dad, right? So only as these obstacles get in the way of moving toward the things that they want, do we really have to address them. And listen, if people are starting to get nervous being like, but are we going to miss it? We're probably not going to miss it, right? The individuals that we serve, there's a good chance that these are real obstacles, right? The voice hearing is probably really getting in their way. So it's not going to hide. And in fact, you'll probably get better data about the voices or the delusions as we're talking about trying to get this thing that's really important for the individual. So this is one of those good news moments. Cognitive therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy has been studying these symptoms for a long time. So we actually have really good conceptualizations, really good generic formulations for all of the obstacles that we could come across with the individuals that we serve. And so with the really good conceptualization, we can develop a strategy for change where we're going to address the obstacle as it's getting in the way of the individual moving toward what he or she wants. And in a way that we can sort of permanently neutralize the problem and get them back on track to what they want. As individuals achieve the things that they've been wanting in their life all along, you learn things about yourself, right? When I sit and I teach my, I teach my daughter how to throw a baseball, I learn things about myself, right? That I'm capable, or that I'm connected, right? That I have value in this world, that there are people who care about me. I'm not all alone. But the individuals that we serve are learning it through experience, this really visceral way. It's a therapy of learning through doing. And if people go, well, is that cognitive therapy? I'll tell you that if anybody here has done the cognitive therapy rating scale or has ever been graded on it, and if anybody's ever actually read the manual for the cognitive therapy rating scale, which I have multiple times, in the section on guided discovery, Beck writes that for many people, the Socratic questions will help, will alleviate the problem. For individuals who do not respond to the Socratic questions, we need to consider other approaches like behavioral experiments, exposure, and skill training. And so Beck in the 80s writes that behavioral experiments are the driving force. Recently, I was fortunate to see Christine Podesky talk at the World Congress of CBT. And in her discussion about guided discovery, Chris really talks about the importance of guided discovery, and that guided discovery is not a talking discovery. It's discovery. She said, I forget the percentages that she gave, but she said like most of your sessions should be getting up and trying it out, putting hands on and doing stuff. So it's not about talking it out, it's about doing it out. And so for people who are on teams, the whole team becomes the therapist, right? That's going to include everybody. It's going to include the clinicians, it's going to include the psychiatrists, the case managers, the peer specialists. Everybody is one huge group working together to support the individual in moving toward the life of their desiring. So this is sort of an arrow because the order is really crucial here. Many times individuals who I train jump right into the action. They go, okay, great, let's do it, right? Or they jump and they go, let's get you an aspiration so you're motivated. The problem is we need to follow the protocol in the order in which it's designed, right? So we need to activate individuals. That's going to be really important because otherwise you're trying to get aspirations out of somebody who has no energy. And think about it, probably many of you, as you are toiling away during the isolation, are working on overdrive. And maybe like when your day finally ends, if somebody said, oh, what do you want to do for dinner? You're probably like, I want to drink coffee. And that's it, right? Like there's no brain juice left. But if you think about the days when you come down, you're just as brain dead, and your favorite song is on. And then you start smelling, tomato sauce, and garlic bread. And all of a sudden you went from being completely brain dead to completely energized. That's a human experience. So what happened was you got activated. You smelled food, you listened to music, those things that get all of us energized. Once we have the energy going, all of a sudden, you start finding you're going, hey, let's watch a movie tonight, right? We have nothing else to do. So let's get in there and, you know, watch a good movie. And then before you know it, you're planning out the other things that you want to do, right? So as we get activated, and then once we're activated, we're more likely to have the mental energy to invest into identifying aspirations. Once we have the aspirations, those are going to motivate us to do the things that we want to do. So to quickly go through the protocol and each of the steps of it, there's activation, right? So this idea of activating the adaptive mode, it's that way in which we're going to engage the person in. It's this systematic activation. It's going to be inoculating against some symptoms, right? So if we have voice hearers, it's like my mom used to tell me. She used to say, Aaron, you can't talk and listen at the same time. It's true for our voices as well. And so as we start doing stuff together, individuals don't have as much ability to focus in on what the voices are saying. As I start feeling less stressed and more connected, my mind isn't going to the worries about people persecuting me. It also allows us to have an increase in access to cognitive resources, right? It sort of fills up the banks of our brain juice. It also allows us to focus in on alternate possibilities, right? So if I've had these hypotheses of I can't do things until I get the energy, all of a sudden, if we jump up and we go for a walk and I have more energy, it starts to present some sort of like alternate data. The outcome of activation is really eliciting some of the aspirations. A side hustle of activation can be sometimes as we start doing stuff together with the individuals who we serve, they might find that it would be beneficial to just start doing it other times. So for example, if I go for a walk with an individual and they go, oh, this was really great, I feel better. It's like ice cream. If a little bit's good, a lot's better. And so doing that with the individuals that we serve. That leads us to aspirations. It's those personal, meaningful, valued aspirations, those things that we want to be doing, the things that we want to get. It becomes this internal source of engagement. So if we think about this engagement and activation of things like, you know, listening to music or watching videos or trailers or throwing a ball, the idea of going and getting to teach my son how to cook, that's something that lives inside me. The idea of sitting with my mom and that way she doesn't have to worry about going out to the store anymore, that's something that's inside me, and it's always inside me. So it becomes this internal form of engagement, and it becomes really vivid. It also starts to orient treatment. There's a lot of real simple things that we can start doing of saying, you know, acknowledging and validating that we can focus on anything the individual wants to focus in on. And is this thing that we're talking about doing, is that getting us closer to or further away from taking care of your mama? It also becomes a rationale for treatment. It becomes this reason for trying things out. Finally, aspirations provide sort of the beginning and the core of really nice relapse prevention. I think about if we really identify the aspirations that we want, those really beautiful big things. I've been a dad for 14 years, and I don't think that tomorrow I'll be like, you know, I feel like I'm good. I feel like I did the dad thing pretty good. I'm done, right? And so all the things that I've done to keep myself well and keep myself mentally well in order to be a good dad, I'm going to keep doing. So the things that the individual is doing to keep themselves mentally well, to move toward the things that they want, they're going to continue doing because it's in the rationale of these things that they want, right? I want an apartment. I want a home where I can have my family come over. I'm going to want to continue to have that. I'm going to want to continue being a dad. I'm going to want to continue attending spiritual services. So the outcome of aspirations is a motivation for action and this ongoing engagement topic. Finally, when we're talking about action, right, we're going to start to plan and evaluate increasing of activity. Really what we're talking about here is activity scheduling. All of the things that we're talking about lead up to really nice activity scheduling, planning and evaluating the increasing of activity, and that the idea that action leads to more energy and motivation. It leads to decreased psychosis, and it also are the steps toward the aspirations. I can plan those in. Also, activity schedules provide us an opportunity to inoculate against some of the symptoms and problems individuals might be experiencing. Um, and that leads to the obstacles. We address them in the context of where we're moving. So one of the obstacles that I picked out just to help people think about it is one that many people want to understand better about, right? So what we're going to talk about is voices or auditory hallucinations. So what we're talking about with voices is the idea that hearing voices is not in and of itself pathological, right? We know 1% of the population has schizophrenia. About 8 to 10% of the population hear voices on a regular basis and have no diagnosis whatsoever. They're butchers, bakers, candlestick makers, and they walk around and they just happen to hear a voice regularly talking to them. So what ultimately becomes the problem? The problem lies in a series of beliefs that people develop about the voices, right? So if I believe that the voices come and go as they please, then I isolate, right? So if I thought somebody was going to yell at me at any time, I wouldn't be going out and being around people. But when I isolate, think about it. What happens to voices when you isolate? Do they go up or down? Right, up. If I believe that the voices are telling me the truth, I listen for them, right? So if I hear them saying that the FBI is going to come and arrest me, I listen for those voices if I believe that they're telling me the truth. But if you expect to hear a voice, do you think you're more likely or less likely to hear that voice? Right, you're more likely to hear that voice. But if we don't listen for things we don't anticipate hearing. So if I believe the voices are telling me the truth, that they're warning me or they're saying bad stuff about me and trash talking me, I listen for them, right? But since I'm listening for them, it means that I expect to hear them, which increases the likelihood of hearing them. When I hear them, I feel relief that I actually caught them in sort of trash talking me or in warning me. So I never end up at this point where I kind of start to question the validity of the or the credibility of the voices. It just doesn't make any sense. Further, the voices have been hanging out with me much longer than you have as my clinician. And so I kind of trust them more. Finally, if I believe that the voices have the power to follow through on their threats, I either comply or I engage in a behavior to neutralize them. But whenever I comply with it, right, something that looks a lot like a ritual, or I try to neutralize it, which will really look like a ritual, it reinforces the idea of, had I not engaged in that behavior, the voices could have harmed me. Interestingly, the belief that the voices are external, that they're people out in the world, there is no real research to support that belief is associated with dysfunction. If you wanted to go after any belief that's up there, control is where your money's at. The idea of whether the voices are inside my head or outside your head, real people out in the world or not, or just a biological piece, there is no evidence to support that is associated with dysfunction. And the sad reality is that is the belief most people are trying to convince individuals of. And so ultimately, we're sort of on a fool's errand some of the time when we go after that belief. So when we're thinking about restructuring, right, talking about experiential learning, but it's the same cognitive restructuring that we think of from regular traditional cognitive therapy. We might not be breaking out a 5-column thought record, but it's the same thing. We want to identify exactly what the cognition is. We're going to check whether it's accurate or a helpful cognition. Is it helping me feel better or move toward the things that I want? We're then going to help to correct the cognition to make it more helpful or more accurate. The way we're going to correct it and check it is really through experience. And then ultimately change the behavior based on the new cognition. The idea is, in the long run, restructuring some of these maladaptive beliefs and then strengthening the positive beliefs that the individual has, which has really always been at the core of cognitive therapy, right? If you think about what's the adaptive response that we develop, it's a more positive belief. It's not happy thinking, but it's a more accurate and helpful, but usually it's moving in a more positive direction. So this is the CTR protocol. This is a very quick introduction. I do hope that in the future, I'll be able to sort of partner with you guys and bring this wherever you guys are. Again, my name's Dr. Aaron Brinen. With that, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them for you. Anybody have any questions?
This is Alexandra. I was wondering, from the restructuring point of view, can you give an example on how you would restrict a maladaptive and believe to positive belief?
So restructure, say that again, say the last part again.
So restructuring maladaptive beliefs to strengthen to positive belief. I was wondering if you could provide like an example.
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you. That sounds really fun. Sure. So the question was, how do you, what would be an example of restructuring maladaptive belief? And so I think the first thing, and this is not going to be a shocker to you guys, is we need to figure out which is the maladaptive belief. So I'm going to give sort of two different examples. One's actually going to come from negative symptoms because I'm a negative symptoms boy over and over, which is sort of ironic because it's 7 o'clock. I'm sort of bouncing around talking to you guys, but oh well. And then the second one I'll give you is an example from hallucinations. I think that might be helpful. So the first one is, let's say there's an individual who has no energy. So the first thing we need to do when somebody has no energy is actually do a little bit of like sort of a chain analysis of getting an understanding of, you know, oh, when you didn't get up, you know, what stopped you from getting up and sort of cooking that, you know, you were really excited, you bought all the stuff to cook that meal. What got in the way? And so, you know, walk me through it. I want to see it. So you're sitting there, you know, you had the tofu, what happened next? And we really want to get the actual cognitions out of their mind. We need to get them activated. We want to, in the role of the aspirations, but we're just gonna, if they're chatting with you, if they're willing to talk with you, what happened next? And the reason is this: if the person has a maladaptive belief that I can't do it until I get the energy, and I help them see that they can be successful, which is the opposite of a little mistake is as bad as a complete catastrophe. So let's say we do this whole exercise, you know, we work on something on my computer because I need to organize something, and the two of us conclude, wow, even though we made a couple of mistakes, it wasn't a complete catastrophe, and in the end, it ended up being successful. I go, see? So sometimes things work out better than we think that they're going to work out. I go, so what about cooking? And then she'll go, sure, I'll do it when I get the energy. So I restructured the defeatist belief, but her belief was a conservation of energy belief. And that isn't just me being funny. I actually had an audio where that happened. And so let's say an individual has this belief of I can't do it until I get the energy. One of the things that we might do is I might sort of show up. I'm going to say if this is this, I'm just going to be fair. Are we in an office or are we like an ACT team where we're going out on the road? Whoever asked the question.
I would say on the road.
Okay, so you're on the road. Awesome. Made it way easier for me. Not that, I mean, listen, I work in an office, so like I that's what I get stuck in. So let's say we show up, I walk up to the door, I knock on the door and I go, oh my gosh, did you see that video of Jimmy Fallon trying to write thank you notes, but his daughters were all over him? Here, you got to see this, right? And I show them, I go, oh, hey, you know what? I've been in my car all day. Like I got to walk to get my steps in or else I'm going to lose my, you know, I'm going to lose my competition. Let's go. And so I start walking, individual comes with me. I go, right, you know, so what's your energy like today? And they're like, I go, okay, so not high, huh? Right. So we go for a walk, and let's say we walk around the neighborhood. You know, maybe we stop, get a coffee, and we're sitting here. But we look at the video again of Jimmy Fallon's kids, and it's super adorable. And then we start going. At the end of it, I go, man, this is great. Thanks. My legs feel so much better getting out of that car, right? How about you? Oh, I feel good. Oh, so like, what's your energy now? I don't know, like a 6. Isn't that weird? Your energy was an at the beginning, and now it's a 6. That's weird. We should pay attention to that. And so then all of a sudden, we're starting to look at, there's times when they have less energy and more energy, but we start going, so wait a second. Did you wait for the energy to come or did we just go? Oh, we just went. What about the day when you had to go see the doctor, right? And he was kind of like, he was cool, but like you had to sit and wait, and then you had to like fill out all this paperwork. Yeah. Like that was a pain in the neck. Yeah. Did you have more energy that day than the day that you were at home staring at the wall? Yeah. So the day we had fun walking and the day you go and do all that horrible paperwork for the doctor, you have more energy. But the day when you lay around, the energy never comes. I'm curious, is it possible that, so when did the activity happen? Before or after the energy? Well, I guess it was before the energy. We should test that out. Let's see, because that sounds stupid. That sounds weird. But let's test it out anyway. And so then we start testing it out. We just start keeping, but like really like loose collection of data. So it doesn't even feel like they're doing it. And by the way, what I just said, I might do over a couple of meetings, right? So it's a mixture between using the activity schedule as a way of identifying the days when they did nothing versus the day that they had to get up and see the doctor. It is one of the benefits that some of the individuals we serve, they usually had at least one day that week where they didn't do anything, and the other day when they did more. And then we start seeing it. Then it turns into sort of generating of a hypothesis. Isn't that weird? I wonder if that's possible. Let's go check that out. So now now we're looking at it during the week. As we start looking at it during the week, then we start coming up with this new idea and then changing our behavior. So depending on the individual who you're working with, that could be one session where all of a sudden you're up, you're active, you're doing stuff, they have lots of energy, and they're like, that's really weird. We should try it out. And it falls apart in 3 sessions. It could be somebody where you're going to be doing that, and everybody on this, if you're on an ACT team, everybody is hitting the same belief every single time we're going out. So there's different ways that we could go. If we're going to look at something related to voices, sometimes individuals who are right in my office are sitting there and they're really distressed. And so I start by going, this seems really distressing. Can I ask, how loud are your voices on a scale of 0 to 10? Right? 10 is like, can't be louder. 0 is not there at all. And maybe they go, oh, they feel like an 8. I'm like, man, that sounds terrible. Can we try something? It's sort of stupid though. Would you be willing to try something that's stupid? And then, usually they go, yeah, because people like seeing me be stupid for some reason. It's called look, point, name. And then we do this little activity, which basically disrupts the voice hearing experience, and their voices go down. All right. And so now all of a sudden we've tried it and go, well, who chose to do the activity? Do you think anybody's ever told me like, stick it, I'm not doing anything with you? But you chose to do it. So who controlled the voice there? And then we can start again moving toward activity scheduling and seeing those times when they're doing more, times when they're doing less. What's the impact on the voices? So the day your mom made you go to Costco to carry all of the stuff back, how loud were the voices? They weren't. I was arguing with my mom the whole time that she should have let me stay in bed. Okay. How loud were they the day your mom said fine and let you stay in bed? They got really loud. Huh. So on the day your mom's annoying you, you don't hear them at all. And on the day when you stayed in bed, you hear them a ton. Who chose to go with your mom? My mama made me? Okay, have you ever told your mom there's no way you're going and refused? Yeah. So then who chose to go? Me? Okay, so then if you chose to go and going made the voices go down, who made the voices go down? Holy, what? And then we start looking for testing that idea out other times. And it's true across every one of the symptoms that we have. It's an experiential way of restructuring. And then the more that they're testing it, ultimately while you're testing it, you're developing new behaviors. Are those helpful examples?
They're wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. So make sure you're taking care of yourself and be good to yourself. If I can ever be of service, let me know. So, again, I'm Dr. Aaron Brinen. I really appreciate you spending the end of your day with me. Take care, be well, and I will see you guys sometime in the future.